The mystery of the SS Ourang Medan. A sea of silence and mystery. The sea has always been a keeper of secrets. Its vast, silent depths hold stories of triumph, of tragedy, and of mysteries that never find their way to the shore. But in the year 1947, the ocean chose to speak. It sent out a signal, a desperate, crackling plea that carried a message of unimaginable horror. A message that spoke of a captain's demise on the bridge, a crew frozen in terror, and a final grim whisper from the void that said, "I die." This signal, and the silent, ghastly ship that awaited the rescuers who heard the message, would become the foundation of one of the maritime world's most enduring enigmas. This is the story of the SS Ourang Medan. Our story takes place in the Malacca Strait in June of 1947. The world was still healing from the wounds of the Second World War, and these waters were a vital artery of commerce and travel. If we look at a map of the world's shipping lanes, we see a web of connections. But one line, one narrow channel, stands out. Between the coast of Malaysia and the islands of Indonesia lies the Malacca Strait. For centuries, this has been one of the most critical passages on Earth. A strategic choke point, a gateway between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. Even today, it is a superhighway of the sea. A conduit for oil, for trade, for the lifeblood of modern nations. Imagine the scene in the summer of 1947. The war was over, and this corridor was once again pulsing with life. Merchant ships plied these busy waters, their engines thrumming a constant, low drone. A sound felt deep in the bones of ships before it's ever heard by the ears. The air hangs heavy and hot. The sun is a relentless, glaring, yellow eye in a white, hazy sky. The water itself seems to steam. And in quieter moments, in the ports and pauses between journeys, there is another sound. The gentle, rhythmic lap of water against a hull. A peaceful sound. A timeless sound. It's a sound that belies the sheer power, and sometimes treacherous nature of the sea, that makes it. It was here that two American vessels, their identities lost to time, were sailing when their radio operators heard something that would chill them to the bone. At this point, please raise your index finger. Bend it forward and tap that subscribe and like buttons on your screen. Those should be your only response to my distress SOS call. Or should they? Chapter 1. The Distress Call. In the 1940s, the world was connected by a web of invisible waves. For a ship at sea, isolated on a vast expanse of ocean, the radio room was its lifeline. Its only connection to the rest of humanity. It was a place of crackling static, of faint voices emerging from the ether, and most importantly, of Morse code. The language of the sea was not spoken, but clicked. Morse code. A system of communication invented a century prior using a simple series of dots and dashes, short signals and long signals, to represent every letter of the alphabet and every number. To the untrained ear, it sounds like meaningless noise. But to a skilled radio operator, it was a clear and precise conversation, a symphony of clicks, traveling across thousands of miles of empty space. The operator would sit for hours, headphones on, listening to this silent sea of sound, his hand poised over the telegraph key, the small lever used to tap out messages with rhythmic precision. And of all the messages that could be sent, one sequence of dots and dashes was universal. It was designed for urgency, for simplicity. It was designed to cut through the noise and scream emergency to anyone listening. 3 dots. 3 dashes. 3 dots again. This is SOS. It doesn't stand for Save Our Souls or Save Our Ship, those are later inventions. It was chosen for one reason alone: it is unmistakable. In a world of fading signals and overlapping chatter, the pattern of SOS is clear, urgent, and unforgettable. And it was this precise sequence that broke through the static on that summer day in 1947. The American radio operators, their hands likely moving over their own keys, would have stopped. All other traffic would have fallen silent. The SOS commandeers the airwaves. It demands attention. The message that followed that universal cry for help was not in code. It was in plain language, spelled out letter by letter, each click a hammer blow of dread. SOS. 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 From SS Ourang Medan. We float. All officers, including captain, are dead, lying in chart room and on bridge. Probably whole of crew dead. There was a pause. A terrifying silence, filled only by the hum of the radio and the frantic scratching of a pencil on paper. The operators must have strained, waiting, hoping for a correction, for a sign of life. And then, the signal returned. Not a detailed explanation, but a final, personal surrender. I die. And then, the absolute silence. The carrier wave, the steady hum that indicated the transmitter was still on, may have ceased abruptly. Or, it may have simply continued, a dead signal broadcasting into an empty room, an open line to a ghost ship. The most terrifying sound on the airwaves is not a scream, not an explosion. It is the sound of nothing at all. After a message like that, the silence is heavier than any sound. It is the sound of the abyss, and it had just spoken. The SS Ourang Medan had spoken its last words. Chapter 2. The Discovery. Locating a specific ship on the open ocean is a task of patience and precision. In 1947, without the satellites we have today, it relied on celestial navigation, dead reckoning, and the original coordinates from the distress signal. The crew of the Silver Star, that received the distress signal, would have scanned the horizon endlessly, looking for any sign of the reported vessel. And then, a sighting, a ship dead in the water, a silent silhouette against the endless blue. No smoke from its stack. No signal flags. No movement on its decks. It was, for all appearances, a ghost. Following maritime law and protocol, the Silver Star would have approached with caution. They would have circled at a distance, hailing it by a whistle and by radio. SS Ourang Medan, this is Silver Star. Do you copy? Only silence answered. The decision was made. A boarding party must be sent to investigate. A small boat was deployed, its diesel engine puttering across the calm sea. A fragile link between the world of the living and the world of the silent ship. The men on board looked up at the towering, rusty hull of the freighter as they drew near. A Jacob's ladder, or a pilot's ladder, was hanging down its side, an invitation to a soon-to-be-discovered tomb. As the first rescuer pulled himself over the rail and onto the deck of the Ourang Medan, the feeling was immediate and unmistakable. This was wrong. A ship at sea is a living, breathing thing. It hums with the vibration of its engines. It echoes with the sounds of its crew. This ship was utterly, profoundly silent. It wasn't just quiet, it was empty of life. The only aura it projected was one of absolute abandonment, a silence so heavy, it felt like a physical weight. What they discovered next would forever be seared into their memories, a series of scenes never before witnessed in the annals of maritime history. They found the bodies. But this was not the aftermath of a storm or a battle. There was no violence, no visible wounds. The crewmen were frozen in their final moments, their faces, every single one of them, contorted in pure, unimaginable terror. Their eyes were wide open, staring, as if they had been witness to something so horrifying, it stopped their hearts in unison. The rescue team made their way to the radio room. There, they found the operator. He was still at his post, slumped over his equipment. His hand was near the key, as if he had just finished his last, desperate transmission. His head was rested over his equipment, his own face, a mirror of the terror found on the deck. What is going on? And in a detail that seems pulled from a Gothic novel, they found the ship's dog. It lay dead on the deck, its body rigid. Its lips were pulled back from its teeth in a final, silent snarl. A last, futile act of defiance against an unseen, unknown threat. But the most inexplicable detail, the one that defied all logic, was the cold. They were in the tropics, under a blazing, relentless sun. The metal of the deck should have been scorching hot. But the rescuers reported a strange, localized chill that clung to the ship. A coldness that seeped through their clothes and into their bones. It was an unnatural cold. A deep, penetrating chill that had no source and no explanation. A cold that seemed to emanate from the very horror that had transpired there. The boarding party from the Silver Star were seasoned sailors. They had seen death at sea, but they had never seen anything like this. They stood on those silent decks, surrounded by the frozen tableaus of terror, and they stared at a mystery that defied every rule of the natural world they knew. They were not just looking at a tragedy, they were looking into the abyss, and the abyss had stared back, leaving behind only its chilling, silent signature. Chapter 3: The Fire. Higher at sea for a few moments, the rescuers stood as statues on the silent deck, surrounded by the frozen horror. They decided their next move, to search for a logbook, to investigate the hold, to try and understand the incomprehensible. But the Ourang Medan was not done with its performance. It had one final, devastating act. It began not with a roar, but with a deep, shuddering tremor that ran through the deck plates. A feeling more than a sound. Then came the smoke. It wasn't the gray smoke of a common fire. It was a thick, black, oily plume that erupted from a hatchway with the force of exhalation from hell itself. It carried a pungent, chemical smell that stung the eyes and throat. The decision was instant. There was no time for investigation, no time for thought. There was only time for flight. Shouted orders were swallowed by the growing inferno. The boarding party turned their backs on the mystery and ran for their lives, scrambling down the side of the ship as flames began to devour the superstructure behind them. Their small boat pushed away, the men watching in a state of shock and awe. The fire did not spread, it consumed. It raced across the decks with an almost intelligent fury, as if the ship itself was determined to erase the evidence of what had happened. The Ourang Medan, this silent tomb of a vessel, was now a brilliant, roaring pyre against the sky, a funeral blaze visible for miles in the empty sea. And then, as quickly as it had burned, it was over. The flames, having devoured all they could, reached the waterline. The ship gave a final, mournful groan of twisting metal, and then it listed, its decks sliding into the water. There was a tremendous hiss of steam, the death rattle of the ship, as the ocean poured into its heart, quenching the fire forever. In moments, the stern lifted towards the sky, and then it was gone, pulled down into the crushing, silent darkness. The entire event, from the first wisp of smoke to the final bubble of air, lasted perhaps only minutes. The sea smoothed over as if nothing had ever been there. The American sailors were left alone in a sudden, profound silence, staring at the empty water, the acrid smell of smoke clinging to them. They had come to solve a mystery. Instead, they had witnessed its absolute and final destruction. The truth was not buried, it was erased. All that was left was the story, and the chilling, unanswered question. What cargo, what secret, burned with such a violent need to never be discovered? If you like this kind of mysteries, then your subscription or follow is most appreciated. Chapter 4. The Theories, Navigating the Sea of Possibility. The sea had closed over the SS Ourang Medan, taking with it any hope of a simple answer. We are left now, not with evidence, but with clues. Like scholars piecing together a fragmented ancient text, we must examine the theories that attempt to explain the inexplicable. Each must account for the three pillars of the mystery: the swift and terrifying death, the lack of visible injury, and the sudden, ferocious fire. Theory 1. Illegal cargo. The most plausible theory points to a deadly cargo. The post-war era was a time of shadowy transport. Perhaps the Ourang Medan was carrying ammunitions, volatile nitroglycerin for explosives, or industrial chemicals like potassium cyanide or nerve agents. A leak could have created a toxic atmosphere. Odorless, colorless fumes would have swept through the ventilation system, causing paralysis, convulsions, and death within minutes. The terror on the victims' faces would be a physiological response to suffocation and neural shock. This theory also neatly explains the fire, a stray spark from the engine, or a static discharge igniting the volatile chemicals, turning the ship into a bomb. But why didn't the rescue team feel any health distress? Was the gas gone by then? What, then, 'cause the explosion is the gas was gone? Theory 2. Methane gas. A more natural, yet no less terrifying, possibility is methane hydrate. The ocean floor can release vast bubbles of this odorless, colorless gas. A ship sailing directly over such a release would be instantly enveloped. Methane displaces oxygen. The crew would have suffocated in moments, their brains screaming for air in a vacuum of nothingness, accounting for their horrified expressions. The gas, being highly flammable, could then have been ignited by anything: the spark from the engine's ignition, a crewman striking a match, creating the catastrophic fireball. This theory turns the very sea itself into the culprit. But again, why didn't the rescue team feel any distress? And if that is because the gas was all dissipated by the time they arrived, what then ignited the fiery explosion on the ship? Theory 3. Carbon monoxide. A simpler explanation may lie closer to home. A faulty boiler or generator can flood confined spaces with carbon monoxide. This silent, odorless killer is a common maritime danger. It causes headache, dizziness, confusion, and finally death. This could explain why the crew was found in various locations. They weren't fleeing, but were succumbing to poisoning where they stood or fell. The panic and terror would be the result of hypoxia, the brain starving for oxygen. The fire could have been a separate, tragic coincidence. The faulty boiler that leaked the gas finally triggering a blaze. Carbon monoxide is a slow killer and may not affect the crew on the open deck as it dissipates easily in open air. It does not cause explosions too. What caused the explosion then? Theory 4. Piracy or attack. And then, there are the more speculative ideas. Could it have been piracy or a military attack? Perhaps the crew was overcome by a ruthless enemy. But this theory falters under scrutiny. It does not explain the lack of any visible wounds or signs of a struggle. It doesn't account for the radio operator being left at his post to send a message. And it certainly doesn't explain the bizarre cold reported by the rescuers. Sometimes the most dramatic answer is the least likely. Theory 5. Folklore and the cosmic. But there are clues that don't fit neatly into a scientific box. The reports of an unnatural cold, a chill that clung to the ship, even under the tropical sun. The specific, unified terror on every face, including the dogs. These details have, for decades, fueled theories that venture beyond the mundane and into the realms of folklore and the cosmos. Theory 6. Supernatural or folklore. Maritime folklore is ancient and rich with warnings. Sailors have long spoken of cursed ships, of ghostly vessels like the Flying Dutchman, doomed to sail forever for their sins. Could the Ourang Medan have encountered something not of this world? A malevolent spirit, a vengeful ghost from the deep? In some Southeast Asian legends, there are spirits of the water that bring a deadly coldness, stealing the breath from men. Perhaps the crew saw something, an apparition, a spectral warning, that literally frightened them to death. Their souls frozen in a moment of supernatural terror. The cold felt by the rescuers could have been the lingering presence of this entity. The very echo of death itself. Theory 7. Extraterrestrial. Could the explanation come from beyond our world? The 1940s saw the dawn of the UFO phenomenon. The theory of an extraterrestrial occurrence suggests the ship was the subject of a close encounter. An unknown craft, a weapon or experiment we cannot comprehend, could account for every bizarre detail. A beam of energy could have caused rapid decompression or neural disruption, killing the crew instantly while leaving no mark, perhaps even lowering the local temperature. The frantic SOS could have been sent as the phenomenon began. The final fire could have been caused by the same otherworldly energy, overloading the ship's systems, or even a deliberate act of erasure. In this theory, the Ourang Medan didn't just have an accident, it crossed paths with something infinitely beyond human understanding. These speculations, the ghostly and the cosmic, are compelling because they speak to the deepest parts of our imagination. They are the modern equivalent of ancient sailors fearing the edge of the world. While they lie outside the boundaries of conventional evidence, they persist because the event itself lies outside the boundaries of conventional explanation. The truth of the Ourang Medan is likely a simple, tragic accident, a deadly combination of human error and dangerous cargo. But the mystery endures because the proof is forever buried under tons of seawater. And so, the legend grows in the space between what we can prove and what we can feel. It becomes a canvas onto which we project our oldest fears and our newest wonders. A perfect, unsolvable riddle from the vast and deep, unknown seas. Each theory has its flaws. Methane doesn't typically explain the localized cold. Carbon monoxide doesn't usually cause such dramatic expressions of terror. Illegal cargo is plausible, but unproven. In the end, the loss of the ship itself is the greatest obstacle to the truth. The Ourang Medan is more than a shipwreck. It is a Rorschach test on the water. We look at its story, and we see our own fears reflected back at us. Of the deep, of the unknown, of a silent, invisible death. And how we fear anything capable of causing death. The truth is likely a simple, tragic accident. But without proof, it remains one of the ocean's most perfect and enduring legends. Chapter 5. The Conclusion. The story of the SS Ourang Medan endures, not because we know what happened, but because we don't. It is a perfect maritime legend. A fleeting, terrifying broadcast from the unknown. A silent ship waiting under the sun, and a final, cleansing fire that returned it all to the deep. It serves as a reminder of the sea's immense and timeless power. It can give life and commerce, but it can also keep secrets, forever hiding the final moments of those who sail upon it. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the deep blue seas. What do you believe happened aboard the Ourang Medan? What is your wildest guess? Indulge me with your craziest guesses. I invite you to share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. I will wait for the craziest guess of all in the comments. If this tale of mystery from the depths brought you intrigue and calm, please consider subscribing to The Gentle Scholar for more stories like this. Until our next exploration, may your mind be curious, your heart be calm, and your sleep be deep and peaceful. Good night.